As you all heard, much of the hate and harassment that we've been witnessing was focused on Twitter. We are extremely pleased that Twitter accepted our invitation to join the summit today to share with you their new rules and their new procedures that they just released 2 days ago. And you're gonna hear all about those rules. Coming from the nest of Twitter in San Francisco is Del Harvey. Del is Vice President of Trust and Safety for Twitter. She leads an international team to define and enforce policy and ensure user safety and security in this challenging realm of modern social media. Before coming to Twitter, Del spent 5 years as the law enforcement liaison for a group fighting child sexual exploitation, and she worked with agencies ranging from local police departments to the FBI, US Marshals, and Secret Service. Del's a member of the advisory board for InHope, which is the International Association of Internet Hotlines. There's a lot going on at Twitter right now for those of you who watch the internet industry and things going on. It's a very incredibly intense time for them in terms of their new announcement. So we really appreciate that Del has taken time out. Her child turned 1 year old this week, and so she flew out just specifically to be here with ADL today. So please join me in welcoming Del Harvey.
I also just want to say I did know what I was walking into when I agreed to come here. I even knew what the panel was going to be before I talked. So I came into this with eyes wide open. What I wanted to do before Deborah and I sat down and chatted is walk you through what we announced a little earlier this week, which was the culmination of work that we'd been doing for a very long time. As Deborah mentioned, my daughter was born a year ago on November 15th, and a full year later to the day, we rolled out these updates, and it felt like I had a second child that we finally gave birth to. So very relieved to have this one out. The changes are really in 2 areas, and I'll walk you through both. But before I do that, just some context around why for Twitter this has been such a sort of unique challenge. And first, some animation on the slide. This is a very jazzy thing that I stole from somebody else's deck when I made this. All right, so Twitter. It is a platform that gives itself very much to being live and public and conversational. It is a window to what's happening all around the world. We have over 300 million active users with more than 1 billion tweets posted to the platform every 2 days. 77% of our users are outside the United States, and an astonishing 80% are actually primarily active on mobile, all of which presents kind of interesting challenges for us in terms of how we display content, how we have reporting work. All of those sorts of things have to change depending upon how people are interacting with it. And as I said, a lot of the unique challenges that come are really tied to issues relating to safety. So what we announced earlier this week were really meant to serve these principles. We've been doing a lot of work to try to make sure that we have an underlying framework that we can always keep in mind as we're trying to come up with policies, as we're trying to iterate on our policies, and as we're trying to make sure that, Twitter, yes, we absolutely support free expression, but we draw the line when behavior starts crossing from free expression into abusing or targeting others. And that's something that we've been working and evolving over the years. And a lot of, one of the things that we rolled out end of the year last year was we actually added an explicit prohibition in our policy to hateful conduct. We called it out separately from just targeted abuse or harassment. We said you also cannot engage in hateful conduct targeting someone based on race or gender or national origin or religious affiliation or so on. And what we have just done now based on feedback from users, based on feedback from the ADL, who graciously joined the Trust and Safety Council that we formed earlier this year, we decided that we kept hearing the feedback that people, A, either didn't even know that this behavior was against our rules, or B, didn't know where to report it if they came across it. So as you can see, we added a new little option, what the arrow points to, that actually explicitly calls out this is directing hate against someone, or against a race, religion, gender, orientation, in hopes of it being a clear reporting path for people, and in hopes of it also giving us more context as to why they're reporting the issue. The other change that we made along with this is some major changes to our back-end systems to allow us to better process bystander reports. So reports from the person who is not necessarily the one experiencing the abuse, somebody who sees it, somebody who stumbles across it, a friend, whatever. We made a number of changes to be able to better take action on those reports without having to rely as much on the person who's directly experiencing the abuse. We also engaged in a pretty massive undertaking, which was, I'm sure that for those of you who are on Twitter, at some point you have seen a tweet going around that has a screenshot of something terrible, and it says, really, Twitter, this doesn't violate your terms of service? I've seen those too. Twitter's really good about surfacing all of the bad policy calls we make, so that's helpful, I guess. We've used all of those, we've looked at them, we've said, okay, why did the person who looked at this not make the right call? This is a violation of our policies already, what happened? And we were finding that oftentimes the person who's doing that frontline review didn't have the historical context, or didn't understand what the image referenced, or didn't understand what a phrase meant. What does ovens mean in a broader context if you didn't grow up learning about the Holocaust? Like things like this that we were finding were really a problem for us. So based again on feedback from groups like the ADL, these instances where we were getting it wrong, all this sort of stuff, we put together a specialized and really comprehensive training on here's what these things mean. Not just here's a word that's bad, but here are words that when used certain ways have additional meanings. Here's what those meanings are. Here's why those are abusive. Here's the underlying sort of components in the history of where these things came from. And then along with that, we actually implemented a new structure that allows us to push out regular updates to everyone who is touching these reports if we start noticing that we either A, are getting something wrong, or B, if we see that there's a new trend evolving, if something new emerges, to make sure that it isn't just like this static one-time thing that then goes out of date and then we start messing up again. I'd like to make sure that we keep benefiting from all of the work that we put in on this, since it's been months and months of stuff there. And really again, without the feedback that we got from the ADL, from other groups in the space, it would have taken us a lot longer to even come up with a plan on how to tackle this. So I definitely appreciate that as well. The other two things that we added are really meant to focus on allowing you to control your Twitter experience a little bit more. And I'll go through those and then I'll briefly touch on a couple things that won't be immediately obvious, but that we actually think will also be very high impact. So the first thing we added was now you can mute notifications. So if somebody sends you a message and it has a certain word in it, or a phrase, or a hashtag, or an emoji, and you just don't want to get any more notifications with that, you can mute it. You just won't see it in your notifications. Doesn't tell the person you muted it, but it's a way to just not have to see that content when you go to your @replies. We put it in notifications initially. We are thinking about what other parts of the product we might expand it to, but we really focus on notifications initially because we've heard feedback that that's where pain is felt most acutely for this sort of thing. Relatedly, we also added the ability to mute a conversation. So if 3 people were having an @reply conversation and somehow you got looped into it and you don't know where or why or how, or you're just really tired of all the cat pictures or whatever, you can mute that conversation And you then, again, won't get any notifications from that conversation. Both of these are tools to help you control what your notifications experience look like. Neither of them are meant to be a substitute for us taking action on content that violates our policies. I just want to be really clear on that. We're not saying that, oh, well, if you can't see it, it's fine then. It would be nice, but that's just not how it works. It's not fine then. So we are also still working, again, as I said, to both be able to do more from bystander reports and then some of the other improvements that we have sort of in stock. And I think my next slide is just a thank you slide, so I won't go to it just yet, and I'll tell you about the other piece. One of the things that was referenced was, you know, oh, well, great, this account gets suspended, and then they just create a new account and come right back. Yeah, that's something that is very much a challenge for us, but it's also something we've been investing in really heavily in terms of better developing our back-end systems to be able to consistently identify accounts and then take action on them before they can re-engage in the abusive behavior and do more to actually, when people are suspended, keep them off the platform moving forward. It's an area that we are very much thinking about and very much investing in, along with a lot of the other work that we're trying to do around being able to more proactively identify challenges that are coming up that we can hopefully take action on before they become problems. If something's starting to become an issue, being able to catch it before it escalates or snowballs or that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that that was also very much something we're aware of, but also we have been working on it a lot. We are beginning, I think, to make some real progress. And I think that you've potentially seen some news coverage that has discussed some of the progress that we've been making there. So more where that's coming. Yeah, see? Over to Deborah. I'll switch sides with you.
So we'll just sit. So I want to start, for those of you who are not aware, ADL has been reporting about online hate for about 25 years now. Our first report was Poisoning the Web. And under the leadership of Chris Wolf, who's been chairing and really pushing us forward in this arena, for almost 10 years, we've been going in and out of Silicon Valley, meeting with all the social media companies and getting them to focus on this problem. So I remember distinctly, Dal, coming to the Twitter Nest on Market Street. The office had just opened, and sitting with Twitter execs. I don't think you were there at that meeting, actually. And Twitter was the one company that said to us, we're not going to have rules. We were urging them to do best practices, and they're like, that's not what we're about. We want free open pipes.
So you should have had me at that meeting.
We should have had you at that meeting. So what
I am
changed?
all about
and I kept saying they're so naive, and and they're very. Many of them were young, and I felt like, when are they going to grow up? And so what changed in these years? You said that too. So
now.
in the culture of Twitter, what changed to make you become responsible adults here?
I don't want to go that far. It's funny because I actually think that this is a broader challenge than Twitter. This is something that we see a lot of, I think, in tech as a whole, which is you have people who, I often think of them as like the people on the product and engineering side, right? And they're like creating these products and they're like, these are going to do such great things and people are going to use them to do like amazing, wonderful things and everything will be awesome. And then you're like, did you notice that this could be used in really terrible ways and do awful things? You're like, why would somebody do that? And you're like, oh, you sweet summer child.
Right.
So
Peppy, I mean, we heard that story, right?
Save Peppy.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that that's a challenge that Twitter, we often sort of hear Twitter, Facebook, Google in one word, like all lumped together. And Twitter is definitely the youngest, definitely the smallest, and is, I think, behind still some in terms of sort of having that, both, quite frankly, just sheer resources at the company's disposal, but also in terms of how the products has evolved. And in the beginning, it was the tweets must flow, the free speech wing of the free speech party, and all of those sorts of things. And one of the reasons that I was saying, only partially joking, it's a shame that I wasn't at that conversation that you had some years ago, because I was already at Twitter, is because, you know, there is very much this point at which one person's free expression tips over that line and silences others, or has a chilling effect on other people's speech. And I think that over time, Twitter has become more and more aware of those nuances and more sensitive to sort of what I often refer to as sort of the trickle-down ramifications of design decisions, even. And I think that that's something that people have been taking more and more to heart, and I think the company as a whole, you know, for some number of years there, and for some period of time, quite literally, I was the only person working on this stuff there. And then it was only my org that was really deeply passionate and involved about this stuff. And then now, all of a sudden, we really have a groundswell of interest across the company, because I think this is something that people care a lot about. And now I think they're starting to see why it's so important.
Good to hear. So I'm realizing, as we're having this conversation about growing up, and we're doing this on the couch, so I'm taking over my husband's role as psychiatrist here. And
so, I mean, I can...
We can like... So, when did you find... Okay, so...
it all began with
your mother, right?
Yeah.
So we're glad to hear that Twitter is now taking more aggressive action against targeted offensive tweets, such as those we heard so graphically about by the journalists. But these steps may not apply to tweets that are not targeted. Is that... And if maybe you could explain to people what the difference is.
I mean, essentially, one of the areas where it is most clear for us from a policy perspective, from being able to enforce, is if I send a tweet to you and it is a threat, this is very clear cut. If I send a tweet to you and it has epithets or slurs, still pretty clear cut. If I send a tweet to you and it says, I hope you die in a fire, yeah, these are all clear-cut violations. Even if you were, though, and this is where the targeted versus non-targeted thing gets confusing, if you were to tweet, and not maybe tweet at me, but say, I hope Del Harvey dies in a fire, still a violation. You're saying, like, this is something that I hope happens to this person. Wishing, hoping, or promoting death, harm, or disease is the very catchy internal framing of that bit. And, you know, whether that's at an individual or a group of people, that's something we would take action on. What starts getting more complicated is when someone is just tweeting either to others who share their beliefs or just, you know, on their own profile and not at anybody else, of views that are just frankly abhorrent or completely illogical, but not threatening or not explicitly abusive at someone. And that's, I think, where, you know, that's where a big challenge for us lies. Part of what we really want to do now that we've pushed these updates out, and now that we're starting to see the impact of that, is be able to take data and say, okay, well, hopefully we've cleared up these areas. Hopefully we've moved some of these gray spaces out and defined them clearly. Where's the next one? Where are we still missing content? What does it look like now that we're able to do a better job? I went silent. Able to do a better job of identifying repeat offenders, able to identify people who are maybe trying to send tweets and then delete them to not get caught. Like, we've made a lot of progress in those areas, and now it's time to sort of keep improving on that, but also figure out where we're going to be looking next.
So right now, even with the new procedures, the burden is still on us, the users, to flag the content. Do you think you'll get to a place where Twitter can actually identify it before we even have to get to that point where the burden's on us to do it? Are the things Twitter could do proactively, like when you were talking about muting certain key terms, couldn't you do that as well? Or what would be the downside for you doing that?
Well, I mean, I think the downside of us deciding to simply not show certain words, you know, one of the things that we see a lot of is counter speech. People who will use words or phrases that are absolutely abhorrent when used in one context, but they are either reclaiming it, or they're saying, hey, this isn't okay, or they are saying, hey, you know, look at this, let's talk about how this isn't okay. And this sort of automated removal of content is something that tends to very quickly have unintended consequences. What we do want to think about, and what I'm really looking forward to exploring, is being able to do it on a more individual basis. So if you've said, hey, I don't want to, I want to mute these words, I don't want to see them, thinking about how we can actually use that data to then apply to your experience on Twitter, rather than this universal situation, because people have different levels of sensitivity, of tolerance, of acceptance, of use, even language gets into play really quickly, because words can literally mean different things but be the same word.
Right.
So all of those sorts of things mean that, we're obviously continually looking. If I could find the magic automated thing that would let me stop abuse before anybody had to report it, I would be on that so fast, and we will keep trying to find things along those lines, but there hasn't been a clear path yet.
So do you have a message, in the previous session, Jonathan Weitzman, we heard, went off Twitter. He's now back on, but do you have a message for people who have gone off and just said enough? I can't take it anymore. Do you think what you've just announced today is going to change the climate for them?
I hope it's a step, but I think that what I would say more than anything else is, I totally get it. I get why they would want to take that step, and I want to make sure we're doing what we can to make sure that others don't feel they have to take that step, and that if they do want to come back, that they have a better experience. I also, again, yes, we've rolled out these product changes. Yes, we've rolled out these, this new reporting flow. We're not going to magically start getting everything right. We're still going to make mistakes, but we think we've now set it up in a way that will certainly allow us to make them less often, and take those instances where we are and use it to course correct more quickly.
Okay.
And I think, the other thing is just, this is something that is really important.
Good.
We're going to keep working on it.
So last question for you. I don't know, those of you who are in New York and don't read your New York Times online, I was surprised at the stat about how many read it online. I'm still one of those that sit Sunday morning and look forward to my paper. And the front page of the style section, which I thought was interesting that it appeared there and not in business, was focused on Twitter. And it was an article by Farhud Manjoo. And I want to quote him, because it really summed up what my experience had been during this cycle. He said, "Twitter functioned as this election cycle's heartbeat. Just about every story that captivated the campaign either began on Twitter or got its viral energy there. A breaking news event wasn't really a breaking news event until it was a tweet that could be passed around and commented on, and only then would it hit the wider online and television news circuit." So if you could just end by telling us, what your view of the impact was. Were you all excited by that? I saw 300 million users over this election cycle. Did what we were seeing and so concerned about, did that mirror society? What's just your view of Twitter's impact on society right now?
I think in some ways the question is almost, what's society's impact on Twitter? And that...
Did you all hear that? I know the mic went down a little bit.
Because it was really deep, so...
It's really deep. You don't want to miss that.
I think the question is in some ways more, what is society's impact on Twitter? Because it is, Twitter is in almost every way very reflective of the people who are on it. And I think that one of the really interesting things that we have seen throughout is that, whether in this election cycle or just broadly, is we do see people who are standing up when they are seeing something that is not okay and saying, hey, this is not okay. And I feel as though we are actually seeing, in a lot of ways, a groundswell of that more than we have before. And there's a tweet out there that I found very entertaining, and it has profanity, so I apologize in advance.
Trigger warning.
Yes, trigger warning, profanity. And it said, next they came for the Muslims, and we said, not this time, fuckers. And the increasing sort of message that I feel like we've been seeing are, yes, there are people who have extremist viewpoints on any issue you can imagine. We have some very extremist knitters, believe it or not, people who are very, very, very aggressive about what they consider proper knitting. Really, any extremist viewpoint, we probably have some people. But what I feel like we are starting to see is really society acknowledging that and people being more willing to stand up and try to fight for what they view as right, even in those situations.
Right. So I would guess extreme knitters just keep people in stitches. Okay, so it's late. So I want to thank Del for joining us today. Really important progress, but a long way to go. Thank you so much, Del.
Wow.